June 6, 1944. Somewhere off the coast of Normandy, aboard the USS Augusta, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley stood on the bridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the chaos unfold on Omaha Beach. The reports coming in were catastrophic. Men pinned down on the sand, landing craft destroyed by artillery, entire companies shredded before they could reach the seawall. For a terrible hour that morning, Bradley considered the unthinkable. Evacuating Omaha entirely, pulling his forces back, admitting failure on the most important day of the war. What Bradley did not know, what he could not have known in that moment of crisis, was that the German defenders he was facing were themselves on the edge of collapse, not from lack of courage, not from poor positioning, but from a simple, brutal arithmetic that would only become clear in the hours and days that followed. The Allied forces landing in Normandy that day outnumbered their German defenders by nearly 5-1. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This is not the story of D-Day as it is usually told, the story of heroic assault against impregnable fortresses, of brave men charging into the teeth of prepared defences. That story is true, but incomplete. This is the story of what happened when German commanders, men who had spent years preparing for this moment, finally understood the scale of what they were facing. When they realized that for every soldier they had defending the beaches, the Allies had 5 ready to come ashore. When the mathematics of their situation became inescapable, it is a story of denial and dawning horror, of commanders who could not believe their own intelligence reports, of an army so stretched, so thin, so fundamentally outmatched that even the most brilliant defensive tactics could only delay the inevitable. And it is a story of what those commanders said, what they wrote, what they confided to their staffs and their diaries when the truth finally became undeniable. The German defense of Normandy was built on an assumption, a dangerous assumption. Field Marshal Rommel, commander of Army Group B and the man responsible for defending the French coast against Allied invasion, understood better than most that the coming battle would be decided in the first hours. He had seen what Allied air power could do. He had experienced the weight of American industrial production in North Africa. He knew that once the Allies established a beachhead, once they began pouring men and material ashore in the quantities only they could manage, the battle would be lost. His solution was simple in theory, almost impossible in practice. Stop them on the beaches, throw them back into the sea before they could gain a foothold. Every tank, every gun, every soldier needed to be positioned close enough to the coast to engage the invasion, force immediately, before it could organize, before it could bring its overwhelming strength to bear. But Rommel did not control all the forces in France. He did not even control all the forces in his own sector. The panzer reserves, the armoured divisions that would be crucial to any counterattack, were held back under the direct authority of Adolf Hitler himself. They could not move without the Führer's personal permission, and Hitler, on the morning of June 6th, was asleep. The forces Rommel did control were spread thin across hundreds of miles of coastline. The 7th Army, responsible for defending Normandy, had approximately 50,000 men positioned to resist the invasion. They were dug into bunkers and strongpoints, protected by obstacles and minefields, supported by artillery that had been carefully sighted to cover the beaches. On paper, it looked formidable. In practice, it was a shell. The average German infantry division in Normandy in June 1944 bore little resemblance to the divisions that had conquered France 4 years earlier. Those formations, the ones that had swept across Europe with terrifying speed and precision, had been fed into the Eastern Front, ground down in the endless meat grinder of the war against the Soviet Union. The divisions defending Normandy were largely static formations, filled with older soldiers, men recovering from wounds, troops from occupied territories pressed into German service. Many had never seen combat. Many were equipped with captured weapons, a logistical nightmare of different calibers and spare parts. The 716th Infantry Division, which held the sector, including Omaha and Gold Beaches, was typical. Its commander, Lieutenant General Wilhelm Richter, had approximately 7,500 men under his command. Nearly half were Osttruppen, soldiers from Soviet territories who had been captured and pressed into German service. Their reliability was questionable. Their motivation was minimal. Many would surrender at the first opportunity, and Richter knew it. The 352nd Infantry Division, which would make Omaha Beach into a killing ground, was somewhat better. It had approximately 12,000 men, and they were mostly German. But even this formation was under strength by the standards of 1940. It was a new division, raised only in November 1943, and it had never faced the kind of amphibious assault that was about to hit it. Across the entire Normandy front, from Utah Beach in the west to Sword Beach in the east, the Germans had perhaps 50,000 soldiers in position to meet the initial assault. Against them, the Allies were bringing 156,000 men ashore on the first day alone. The mathematics were brutal. 5-1. Perhaps worse. But the German commanders did not know this. Not at first. The fog of war, the confusion of battle, the disruption of communications by Allied air attacks and naval bombardment, all combined to obscure the true picture. In the early hours of June 6th, what the Germans saw was chaos. Paratroopers dropping behind their lines, scattered across the countryside in what appeared to be a disorganized mess. Naval bombardment pounding their positions. Landing craft approaching through the pre-dawn darkness. It looked serious. It looked like a major operation. But was it the invasion? The main effort? Or was it another diversion, another Allied trick designed to draw forces away from Calais, where the real blow would fall? This question paralyzed the German response in the critical first hours. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West and Rommel's superior, initially believed Normandy was a feint. His intelligence staff had been telling him for months that the main invasion would come at the Pas de Calais. Every piece of evidence pointed to it. The massive force assembled in southeastern England, the presence of General Patton at Dover, the radio traffic, suggesting preparations for a cross-channel assault at the narrowest point. All of it confirmed what German military logic suggested. The Allies would strike at Calais. So when reports of the Normandy landings reached von Rundstedt's headquarters outside Paris, his first reaction was caution. Wait, see how the situation develops. Do not commit the reserves until the main invasion becomes clear. The request to release the panzer divisions, to move the armoured reserves forward to counterattack the beachhead, went to Hitler's headquarters at Berchtesgaden. But Hitler was asleep, and his staff would not wake him. The decision was delayed. Hours passed. The Allies continued to pour ashore. By mid-morning, the scale of the operation was becoming apparent. This was not a raid. This was not a diversion. 5,000 ships, hundreds of thousands of men. The largest amphibious assault in history. Lieutenant General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, received a phone call that morning that captured the growing desperation. Rommel was in Germany, visiting his wife for her birthday. He had believed the weather was too poor for an invasion and had taken the opportunity for a brief trip home. Now he was racing back to France, but he was hours away. In his absence, Speidel was trying to coordinate the defense. The call came from General Erich Marx, commander of the LXXXIV Corps, whose forces were bearing the brunt of the assault. Marx was a capable officer, a veteran of the Eastern Front who had lost a leg in combat. He had been warning for weeks that his sector was vulnerable, that he did not have enough troops to hold the line if the Allies came in force. Now the Allies were there, and his warnings had been proven correct. General Speidel, Marx said, his voice tight with strain, the situation is serious. They are coming in overwhelming numbers. I need reinforcements immediately. Speidel explained the problem. The panzer reserves required Hitler's authorization to move. That authorization had not come. The divisions closest to the fighting were already engaged. There was nothing to send. Marx was silent for a moment. Then he said something that would echo through the German command structure in the hours and days that followed. They outnumber us 5-1 on some beaches. Perhaps more. If we do not receive reinforcements soon, we will not be able to hold. 5-1. The number was an estimate, a field commander's assessment based on incomplete information, but it was remarkably accurate. On Omaha Beach, the initial assault waves had faced roughly 2,000 German defenders. The American force landing on that beach in the first day would exceed 34,000. On Utah Beach, the ratio was even more lopsided. The British and Canadian beaches saw similar disparities. But even as Marx was conveying this assessment, even as the reality of the numbers was beginning to penetrate German headquarters, the response remained paralyzed. Von Rundstedt repeated his request for the Panzer reserves. Hitler's headquarters repeated that the Führer was not available. The morning dragged on, and the Allies continued to land. Rommel arrived at his headquarters in La Roche-Guyon in the late afternoon. The situation briefing he received was devastating. The Allies had established a continuous beachhead. They were expanding inland. German counterattacks had been piecemeal and ineffective. The 352nd Division had fought brilliantly on Omaha Beach, inflicting tremendous casualties on the Americans, but even there the line had broken. The Americans were ashore. They were not going back. "What are our reserves?" Rommel demanded. The answer was damning. The reserves were still waiting for authorization to move. The 21st Panzer Division had launched a counterattack toward the coast between Sword Beach and Juno Beach, reaching the sea briefly before being pushed back. But it was a single division against multiple Allied divisions. It could not hold. Rommel's response, recorded by multiple officers present, was blunt. "The war is lost." It was a remarkable statement to make on the first day of the invasion, before the outcome of the battle was certain. But Rommel was not being defeatist. He was doing mathematics. He knew what was coming ashore. He knew what he had to stop it. And he knew those numbers did not work. The Allies had achieved complete surprise, not in the location of the invasion, though that had been masked by the Calais deception, but in the scale of their effort. The German High Command had expected an invasion. They had prepared for an invasion, but they had not truly grasped what Allied industrial and military power could deliver when fully mobilized. In the weeks before D-Day, Allied forces had assembled more than 7,000 vessels, from battleships to landing craft. They had gathered nearly 12,000 aircraft. They had concentrated 39 divisions in England, more than 1 million, and a half men, all trained and equipped, and ready for the assault. The logistics of the operation were staggering. 2.5 million tons of supplies, more than 16 million rounds of ammunition, 500,000 vehicles. The Germans knew the Allies were strong. Their intelligence had tracked the build-up, though they had significantly underestimated its scale. But knowing something intellectually and confronting it in reality are different things. The reality, on June 6, 1944, was 156,000 Allied soldiers coming ashore against 50,000 defenders. The reality was 5-1. And the German commanders were just beginning to understand what that meant. The first detailed assessment of Allied strength reached von Rundstedt's headquarters on the evening of June 6. Intelligence officers had been piecing together reports from the front, interrogations of captured Allied soldiers, analysis of the equipment coming ashore. The picture that emerged was alarming. "We are facing at least 5 divisions, possibly more," reported Colonel Bodo Zimmermann, von Rundstedt's chief of operations. "Naval support is overwhelming. Air superiority is complete. They are landing supplies and reinforcements at a rate we cannot match." Von Rundstedt listened in silence. He was 68 years old, the most senior officer in the German army, a man who had orchestrated the conquest of France in 1940. He understood what he was hearing. "What are our casualty reports?" he asked. Preliminary figures suggested the Germans had lost between 4,000 and 9,000 men on the first day, killed, wounded, and captured. The 716th Division had essentially ceased to exist as a fighting force. The 352nd Division had taken heavy casualties, but remained combat effective. Other units were in varying states of disarray. But the Allies had lost men too. The reports from Omaha Beach suggested American casualties in the thousands. Surely this meant something? It did not in the way the Germans hoped. General Walter Warlimont, Deputy Chief of the Armed Forces Operations Staff at Hitler's headquarters, would later describe the moment when the full scale of Allied strength became clear. It was perhaps June 8th or 9th when we began to receive accurate reports of what was coming ashore. Each day, more divisions. Each day, more tanks, more artillery, more supplies. We had expected a large force. What we saw was something else entirely. The Allies were landing the equivalent of a full division every day. By the end of the first week, they would have more than 300,000 men in France. By the end of June, over 1 million. The build-up was relentless, inexorable, beyond anything the German forces in Normandy could match. General Friedrich Dollmann, commander of the 7th Army, convened a meeting of his corps commanders on June 8th. The purpose was to assess the situation and develop a coordinated response. What he heard was a litany of impossible problems. General Marx, whose LXXXIV Corps had borne the brunt of the initial assault, was blunt. "My divisions are being destroyed piecemeal. We cannot concentrate for counterattacks because Allied aircraft attack any movement during daylight. We are receiving no replacements while the enemy's strength grows by the hour." General Dietrich von Koltitz, commanding the LXXXIV Corps Reserve, reported similar problems. "Every reinforcement we receive is barely enough to plug holes in the line. We are not building strength for a counteroffensive. We are simply trying to avoid collapse." Dollmann asked the question that was on every commander's mind. What were the actual numbers? How many Allied soldiers were now ashore? How many were coming? The intelligence officer present gave his best estimate. "Currently, we believe the enemy has landed between 200,000 and 250,000 men. Based on the rate of reinforcement, this will exceed 400,000 within a week. Our forces in the immediate combat zone number approximately 80,000, including reinforcements that have arrived since the invasion." The room fell silent. The ratio was now between 3-1 and 4-1, and it was getting worse. Dollmann's response, recorded by his aide, was simple. "Then we must attack now, before their superiority becomes absolute. But attack with what?" The panzer divisions that might have made a difference in the first hours were now arriving piecemeal, their movement delayed by Hitler's hesitation and harassed constantly by Allied aircraft. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler Jugend, had been moving toward the front since June 7th, but Allied fighters had turned the journey into a nightmare. Vehicles burned on the roads. Fuel trucks exploded. Officers were strafed in their staff cars. A journey that should have taken hours was taking days. General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, one of the most powerful armoured formations in the German army, would later describe his unit's approach to the front. "By the time we reached the combat zone, I had lost approximately 150 vehicles to air attack. Not one had been lost to ground combat. The Allies controlled the sky so completely that movement during daylight was suicide. When Panzer Lehr finally arrived and launched its counterattack, it was not the concentrated armoured thrust that might have thrown the Allies back into the sea. It was a weakened, disorganised force attacking piecemeal against an enemy that grew stronger by the hour. The counterattack failed. They all failed. On June 10th, 4 days after the invasion, Rommel met with von Rundstedt at the latter's headquarters. Both men understood the situation was deteriorating. Both men knew what the numbers meant, but they disagreed on what to do. Von Rundstedt, the old Prussian, believed in trading space for time. Fall back to defensible positions, preserve the army, fight a war of attrition that might, eventually, exhaust the Allies, or at least make them negotiate. Rommel disagreed. He had seen what Allied firepower could do to retreating forces in North Africa. He knew that every kilometre of withdrawal would be paid for in destroyed vehicles and dead soldiers. The only hope, slim as it was, lay in containing the beachhead, in denying the Allies room to manoeuvre while the 15th Army was brought south from Calais. But the 15th Army was not coming. Hitler still believed Normandy might be a feint. The massive Phantom Army in southeastern England, the fictional Fusag, commanded by Patton, still loomed in German intelligence assessments. What if this was all a trick? What if the real invasion was yet to come? So the strongest German force in France, 19 divisions, more than 200,000 men, remained at the Pas de Calais, guarding against an invasion that existed only in radio signals and inflatable tanks. And, in Normandy, the German commanders watched the Allied force grow stronger while their own forces bled away. General Heinrich Eberbach, who would later take command of Panzer Group West, described a conversation with Rommel around this time. The field marshal was pacing, agitated, going over the numbers again and again. "They have complete air superiority," Rommel said. "They have complete naval superiority. They have more men, more tanks, more artillery, more of everything. And every day the gap widens." Eberbach asked what could be done. Rommel's answer was bitter. "We can die bravely." This was not melodrama, it was mathematics. The Allies were landing approximately 20,000 men per day. German reinforcements were trickling in at perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 per day, and losses were exceeding reinforcements. The German force in Normandy was not growing stronger, it was growing weaker. By mid-June, the disparity had become grotesque. Allied strength in the beachhead exceeded 500,000 men. German strength in the combat zone was perhaps 150,000. The ratio had reached 3-1 overall, but in terms of effective combat power, considering Allied artillery and air support, the disparity was far greater. General Leogier von Schweppenberg, commander of Panzer Group West, had his headquarters destroyed by an Allied airstrike on June 10th, killing several of his staff officers. When he recovered and assessed the situation, his report to Army Group B was devastating. "We are facing an enemy of overwhelming strength. Every attack we launch is met by artillery fire of an intensity we cannot match. Every movement we make is observed from the air. We are fighting blind while the enemy sees everything. Under these conditions, offensive operations are not possible." The German commanders were learning what the Allies already knew. The mathematics of modern industrial warfare favoured the side with greater resources. In the First World War, Germany had been outproduced and eventually worn down. In the Second World War, they had conquered quickly, before their enemies could mobilise their full strength. In Normandy, there was no quick victory to be had. The Allies had come with overwhelming force, and that force was growing. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The realization came in stages, each report bringing new evidence of Allied strength, each day confirming that the situation was not improving. On June 17th, Hitler travelled to Margeval in France to meet with Rommel and von Rundstedt. It was the first time the Führer had set foot in France since the fall of 1940, when he had toured the conquered country in triumph. The contrast could not have been more stark. Rommel presented the situation bluntly. "The enemy is landing divisions faster than we can move battalions. Every day, their material superiority increases. We must either receive massive reinforcements immediately or accept that Normandy cannot be held." Hitler listened, growing increasingly agitated. He refused to accept the assessment. He spoke of wonder weapons, of the V-1 flying bombs that had just begun striking England, of the new jet aircraft that would sweep the Allied bombers from the sky. He spoke of the 15th Army, still waiting at Calais, which could not be moved because the second invasion might come at any moment. What he did not speak of, what he could not accept, was the fundamental arithmetic. The Allies had more of everything: more soldiers, more tanks, more artillery, more aircraft, more ships, more supplies, and they were using all of it. Rommel tried again. "Mein Führer, we face an enemy that outnumbers us 5-1 in some sectors. Our divisions are being ground down. Our replacements do not match our losses. The situation is," Hitler cut him off, "the situation will be stabilized. There will be no retreat. Every man will fight where he stands." It was an order that could not change reality. The Allies continued to land. The German forces continued to shrink. After the conference, as Hitler departed, Rommel turned to his aide, Captain Helmuth Lang. He asked me what I thought. I told him the truth. He did not want to hear it. Lang asked what would happen now. Rommel's answer was recorded in Lang's diary. "We will continue to fight. We will continue to lose. And eventually, we will be destroyed." The German generals knew the numbers. They had known the numbers for days, weeks even, as the reports accumulated and the reality became undeniable. They outnumbered us 5-1, perhaps more. The phrase appeared in report after report, in diary entry after diary entry, in the bitter conversations of commanders who understood they were presiding over a disaster. But knowing the numbers and accepting their implications were different things. Throughout June, German commanders continued to plan counteroffensives, to hope for reinforcements, to believe that somehow the situation could be reversed. It was not stupidity, it was the natural human resistance to accepting the unacceptable. General Hans von Salmuth, commander of the 15th Army at Calais, watched the battle from a distance, his forces still frozen in place by Hitler's conviction that the main invasion had not yet come. In his private correspondence, later captured by the Allies, he wrote of his frustration. "Every day, I read the reports from Normandy. Every day, I see my comrades dying while I sit here, guarding against a phantom. They say we cannot move because Patton might still come. But Patton's army does not exist. The Americans are clever enough to make us defend against nothing while they conquer everything." By mid-June, von Salmuth's assessment was beginning to be shared at higher levels. The intelligence picture was not changing. Fusag remained in place. The radio traffic continued. The agents in Britain continued to report preparations for a second invasion. But the battle in Normandy was being lost, and if the 15th Army did not move soon, there would be nothing left to save. On June 19th, a severe storm struck the English Channel, the worst in decades. For 3 days, the Allied supply line was disrupted. Landing craft were destroyed. Temporary harbours were damaged. The build-up slowed. German commanders seized on this as an opportunity. Perhaps the weather had given them a chance. Perhaps they could concentrate their forces, launch a decisive counterattack, throw the Allies back before the storm abated and the endless tide resumed. But even as they planned, the mathematics worked against them. In 3 days of storm, the Allies lost more equipment to weather than the Germans had destroyed in battle. Yet, when the storm ended, the landings resumed immediately. The disruption was temporary. The Allied advantage was permanent. By the end of June, Allied strength in Normandy exceeded 850,000 men. German strength in the combat zone was approximately 380,000, including every reinforcement that had arrived since D-Day. The ratio was now better than 2-1, an improvement only because German commanders had finally received permission to move some units from the 15th Army. But those units were being fed into battle piecemeal, plugging holes rather than concentrating for counteroffensive. And the Allies were not just landing more soldiers, they were landing more of everything. General Fritz Bayerlein of Panzer Lehr, whose division had been in continuous combat since June 9th, reported to Army Group B headquarters in late June. The division's strength had been halved. They had lost more than 100 tanks, most to Allied air attack and artillery rather than tank-on-tank combat. Their infantry battalions were at less than 50% strength. "We are being destroyed," Bayerlein wrote. Not defeated. Destroyed. There is a difference. A defeated army can retreat, regroup, fight again. A destroyed army cannot. He was not being melodramatic. Panzer Lehr was one of the most powerful divisions in the German army. In 3 weeks of fighting, it had been reduced to a shell. The same process was repeating across the entire front. On July 3rd, General Dollmann, commander of the 7th Army, died of a heart attack. The official cause was cardiac failure. The real cause, his staff believed, was the impossible burden of commanding a battle he could not win. His replacement, SS General Paul Hauser, found a situation even worse than the reports had suggested. The 7th Army was disintegrating. Divisions were being reduced to battle groups, then to remnants. Ammunition was short. Fuel was shorter. Replacement troops were arriving without proper training, sometimes without proper weapons. Hauser's first report to Army Group B was unsparing. The enemy has 3 or 4 times our strength in every category. We can hold for days, perhaps weeks, but we cannot defeat them. The question is not whether we will lose Normandy, but when. The final acknowledgement of the numbers came from Rommel himself, in a letter he never sent. On July 15th, Rommel was preparing a report for Hitler, a final assessment of the situation in Normandy. He had been drafting it for days, each version more blunt than the last. He wanted Hitler to understand what every field commander already knew: the battle was lost. The first draft spoke of the enemy's numerical superiority in carefully diplomatic terms. The second draft was more direct. The third draft, the one that would never be sent, was devastating. "The enemy has won the material battle," Rommel wrote. "They have more men, more equipment, more of everything. Our casualties cannot be replaced. Theirs can. We are losing divisions while they are landing armies. The mathematics are inexorable." 3 days after writing those words, Rommel's staff car was attacked by Allied fighters near the village of Sainte-Foy de Montgomery. The field marshal was severely wounded, his skull fractured. He would never return to command, but his assessment would be proven correct. On July 25th, the Americans launched Operation Cobra, a massive offensive that broke through the German lines at Saint-Lô. Within days, the breakthrough became a breakout. American armoured divisions raced across France, encircling the German forces that had been holding Normandy. The Falaise pocket, where the remains of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were trapped in August, became a killing ground. Allied aircraft and artillery pounded the encircled forces. Tens of thousands of Germans were killed or captured. The equipment losses were catastrophic. General Hauser, commanding from within the pocket, ordered a breakout. Some forces escaped, perhaps 50,000 men, but they left behind nearly everything: tanks, artillery, vehicles, supplies. The German army in France was shattered. Von Rundstedt, who had been dismissed by Hitler in early July for suggesting that the war in the West was lost, was proven right. His replacement, Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, lasted less than a month before being dismissed himself, suspected of defeatism. Von Kluge committed suicide shortly after, leaving a letter for Hitler that blamed the defeat on exactly what every commander had been saying for weeks: overwhelming Allied superiority. The numbers had spoken. 5-1 on D-Day, 3-1 by the end of June. And even when German reinforcements closed the gap slightly, the qualitative advantage remained with the Allies. Air superiority, artillery superiority, naval superiority, industrial superiority. What did the German generals say when they realized they were outnumbered 5-1? They said the war was lost. They said it in staff meetings and in private letters. They said it in reports to Hitler that were ignored or rejected. They said it in their diaries, recording for history the moment when military professionalism collided with political fantasy. General Günther Blumentritt, von Rundstedt's chief of staff, captured the essence of the German reaction in a post-war interview. We knew the numbers. We had known them almost from the first day. But knowing and accepting are different things. We continued to fight because that was our duty, because there was nothing else to do. But we knew. He paused, as if still processing the memory decades later. We knew we were outnumbered. We knew we could not win. And we knew that everything we did was simply delaying the inevitable. The German army had faced long odds before. They had defeated larger forces through superior tactics, better training, faster decision-making. But Normandy was different. Normandy was not a battle of maneuver where a smaller force could outthink a larger one. Normandy was industrial warfare at its most basic. More against less, weight against will. That contest, the numbers always win. The legacy of D-Day is often told as a story of Allied heroism, of brave men storming beaches against terrible odds. That story is true. The men who landed on June 6th faced bullets and shells and terror. Many of them died. Their sacrifice was real. But it is also worth remembering the other side of the equation. The German commanders who watched the Allied build-up and understood what it meant, who sent report after report describing an enemy that outnumbered them 5-1. Who knew, from the mathematics alone, that they could not win? They were not stupid men. They were not incompetent. Many were among the best military minds Germany had produced. But they were facing something that military skill alone could not overcome: the full industrial and military power of the United States, the British Empire, and their allies, concentrated on a single objective: 5-1. The number echoed through German headquarters in June and July of 1944. It appeared in operational reports, in intelligence assessments, in the private despair of officers who could do the arithmetic. And in the end, the arithmetic was all that mattered. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.